Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our conference. This is Mr. Simkin. He is the CEO of a company called Swiftly. And would you like to give a brief background about yourself? Intro.
Great to meet you all. Doesn't have to be so formal. You can call me Jonny. But I'm the co-founder and the CEO of a company called Swiftly. Swiftly is my second company, so I started my first one out of college from my dorm room to make textbooks more affordable for students. Don't know if you have textbooks today anymore or not, but when I was in college we did. And so we grew that company to be one of the largest companies tracking textbook pricing information in the country, and we're building price intelligence tools for college bookstores and wholesalers and publishers. That was acquired in 2012, so that brought me from Southern California to the Bay Area. And then when I moved to San Francisco, I sold my car, built a love-hate relationship with public transit, where I found myself taking it, but oftentimes missing the bus because I couldn't rely on any information that I was seeing in Google Maps or anywhere. And so I started Swiftly to make public transit more effective and more efficient for people around the world. So we have a wide variety of products, but if you open Google Maps, we power a lot of the data that you'll see in Google Maps. We're the largest provider of real-time information in the world. So even AC Transit, I saw there's a bus stop right up the hill over there. If you open Google Maps, all the AC Transit data is coming from Swiftly, all the real-time data. So we're about 100 full-time people. We're live in about 200 cities in 12 countries, and we touch about 2.5 billion annual transit trips every single year. And happy to answer any questions about my journey, starting companies, selling companies, raising capital, whatever would be most helpful.
Yeah, so I think our first thing that we wanted to ask you was a lot of people who want to start companies, the hardest part is starting in the beginning. It's getting the first step, doing the first thing that they need to do. So how did you start your company? Or what were your first steps in kind of building it into the idea that you?
Yeah, so both of the companies I started originated from a pain point that I personally felt. I think you have to assume going into a company that it's going to be something like if you're successful and fortunate, a 10+ year journey. And so hopefully pick a problem or pain point that you personally care about. Oftentimes I see people start companies just to try to make money, and normally those are short-lived. If you find something you're really passionate about, you care about solving that problem, and you solve it better than anyone else, then you'll find that every step of the way it actually becomes more fun, and you just encounter different challenges. So the first thing is find a problem that is meaningful to you personally, that you care about solving. Second thing, tons of steps beyond that, right? But you actually have to legally form a new company, you have to start hiring people, raising capital. There are a lot of tactical things, but the single most important thing is find something that you actually care about and that you're uniquely positioned to solve.
Yeah, this is kind of a question I just thought of. So obviously Swiftly is your second company, and you had another one that you had previously. When you were around our age, from 14 to 18 years old, did you have any business ideas in mind, or did you strive to create any businesses, or had any ideas?
Yeah, I didn't know that entrepreneurship would be the kind of define my career, but when I was your age in high school, I actually really was frustrated with buying textbooks because I did have to buy them for my high school too. So I one summer wrote, me and a friend built a program that was basically tracking books that were for sale on eBay, and then automatically comparing those prices for other companies that were buying textbooks. And at that time, you could arbitrage the market, so we'd buy books for $13 and then sell them for $100 somewhere else. And so that was my first introduction to, there's kind of cool things you can do in the world of just starting a business. And we just did that in my garage, and we were just buying and selling books and stuff. But then when I went to college, obviously that was amplified. So going into college, I was like, that could be interesting. I like the idea of starting a company or finding something that just mattered to me that wasn't really a meaningful problem to solve. It was just kind of a fun arbitrage moment. But going into college, it was either I loved just tech, so I studied engineering as my background, and I knew that I either wanted to do patent law or entrepreneurship to apply technology to help people in some way. And the first lecture that I took on patent law, I fell asleep within 20 minutes, and I realized that was not for me. And then as I started to play around with this more entrepreneurial idea years, I actually just fell in love with it and ended up starting my first company as a result.
Yeah. So like the next point that I kind of want to hit on was like, after you have your first idea, how do you like market it and like grow it into the company you are today, which is a lot bigger than and reaches to a lot more people than obviously your initial idea?
Yeah, scaling a company is really tough, and the way that you do that changes a lot based on your industry, your end market, who your customer is, the stage of your company, the incumbents in the market, and how you want to position relative to them. But I would just say, like, I'll tell you my story, but the way to do it is very context driven based on whatever your company would be. My first company was textbooks. The unique part about that market was that students have 2 semesters in most schools or 3 quarters of class and a few others, right, like UCs. So we had, when we were talking about like helping students buy textbooks in a more affordable way, we had for most schools 2 times a year where that mattered, and the whole rest of the year was done. And so we found that what was best for our market was like very word of mouth, grassroots driven per campus. The problem was you could do that, you could go kind of like deep into one campus. So when I launched that company, we got 1/3 of my entire college using it in like 2 weeks because everyone had to buy textbooks in those 2 weeks. Great. How do you replicate that across 100 schools, colleges, and universities? How do you replicate that across 1,000? It turned out when we tried to replicate those approaches, it was way harder to do that at scale. So we ended up like a combination of digital grassroots. We had to go multifaceted campaign, but that's how we thought about go-to-market in that world, because all the textbook purchasing happened within basically 2 months of the year, or the vast majority of it. In our world now, where I sell to my customer is actually not anyone who directly rides public transit, although that's what I'm trying to serve. We sell to public transit agencies, so we sell to government. And selling to government is a very unique challenge, and you have to do it in a way that enables government agencies to provide a great experience to millions of people that they serve, which sometimes gets lost in the world of government sales. You have a lot of like multi-billion-dollar legacy incumbents you're competing against that have been working with a public transit agency for the last 2 decades. And the way that they solve problems maybe worked really well 20 years ago with the technologies that existed in that time. I think we all have seen the world has changed quite a bit in the last 20 years, and there are new approaches, but government agencies are risk averse. So when we first started, it didn't matter that we were 10 times more effective at solving some problem than a legacy incumbent. Government agencies did not want to take the risk. And so the early days of Swiftly, we had to be really focused on how do we position Swiftly in a way that reduces the risk for transit agencies so that they would be comfortable partnering with us. What's changed, I would say now, because we're one of the more well-renowned brands of what we do in our industry, is that we are becoming the less risky choice, which means we can be a little bit more aggressive for an agency because their risk profile is actually higher to stick with the legacy incumbent that they spend millions of dollars on than to work with Swiftly. So the way that we position has evolved to address that, the way that we talk to agencies, where and when we meet them, the way that we host happy hours at conferences and trade shows. A lot of it now is around helping agencies realize we're the less risky choice, and that what the pain points that they experience, we've solved in 200 cities all around the world, impacting billions of people. So it really does change, but and I could go into a lot more depth and probably put you all to sleep, but those are some of the highlights.
And then sort of like on the same note, how did you sort of, before you became like well known, how did you either get initial capital or become a standout brand and like stand above the rest of your competitors?
Yeah, raising money is definitely an art and a science. My first company that I started in college, I did local competitions like investor presentations and pitches where I'd get like a $10,000 check for $10,000 check for winning a competition. That's not enough to really start a company. And what I found was that a lot of the angel investors that I spoke with, and this has to do with more of the geography because I wasn't in the Bay Area, but most people did not want to take a risk on a 21-year-old kid who hadn't started something and who had no track record. So I was not able to raise larger institutional rounds for my first company. I just bootstrapped it, took it all the way to getting acquired by one of the largest textbook rental companies in the country. So that helped me create my own personal brand because I didn't have anything to rely on prior to that. For my second company, it helped because I already had an exit. So I could tell people, hey, I already built a company that kind of made a pretty material impact on the prior industry. I'm going to do that again for a new industry. And so I was able to raise some capital much faster. But what I found, what I do selling to public transit, most investors just don't care. I think it's really important, both for the economy, the environment, and social equity, but you're asking people to put millions of dollars at stake, and they don't always care about necessarily those more altruistic goals. So we started small. We raised a few $1 million in the early days. And then as we grew bigger and as our revenue and business model became proven, then we went from millions or hundreds of thousands to millions to tens of millions, and we're in the range of hundreds of millions raised. Yeah.
Question, you said your original company got bought out by one of the big textbook rental companies. Do you still see in that company like the DNA of yours? Like, did you help their, the product they're offering now, or was it sort of a capture and kill kind of thing? You were a competition, they didn't want you out there, so they got rid of your company.
It was more intended to be the former, but that good learning experience. That company no longer exists too. So they did acquire us with the goal of bringing our product solution into their product suite. And I would say, candidly, we were 6 people for that. That was a very small acquisition. So it was like somewhere between product hire and acqui-hire. But our team came on, we built the product, we launched it, we started rolling it out to their customer base. The challenge was a good portion of their revenue came from the consumer world, and Amazon entered the space pretty aggressively. So it was like a confluence of 2 main things. Amazon entered the space, and they were not appropriately capitalized based on the growth that they had, because the way that textbook rentals work is. By the way, do you all have textbooks anymore?
Yes.
Printed textbooks?
Yeah.
Okay. So the way there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes with like publishers and stuff. But the way that textbook rentals work is that you as a company, you buy a textbook for $100, you rent it for a semester for $50, so you lose money, you're down $50 like the first rental. Then you rent it the next semester for $50, you're like kind of break even-ish. Then you rent it the third semester, then you make $50. The fourth, and now you're up $100. And then a publisher releases a new version at some point, and like the whole book is now worthless basically when publishers do that. They got a ton of demand, this company got a ton of demand for textbook rentals, so much so that they could not afford to buy the books for $100, and so they pissed off a ton of customers because they had to say, hey, the rental that you did with my company, we can't fulfill it, so sorry. So right when they kind of blew up their own brand by not raising enough money, Amazon also entered the space. So it was like those 2 things that crashed that company. So I saw that go from 65 million in revenue to bankrupt over the span of like 7 years. I wasn't there for the whole 7-year journey, but it's pretty painful. So that company's not around. I would say our DNA, it's pretty hard, like culturally, when you have 2 pretty different companies. Culturally, we were different enough where we did not stick really well. So that was another learning point of like how to not do an acquisition, quite frankly. I think even if that company had done well, I probably would have lasted 2 to 4 years. I think I lasted about 2 years there. So even if things went better, maybe I would have stayed an extra year. But culturally, there was a bit of clashing, and then from the business model, they just got destroyed, which was too bad. Because when we did the deal, they were like set up to be the number one. Like they were really close if they had enough capital, but I didn't, obviously know that was an issue. So when we acquired a company last year, and so being on the recipient end of what a bad acquisition looks like, I did not want that to happen to the founders of the company that we ended up acquiring last year. So we spent a lot of time on just like cultural cohesion and making sure they were the right fit to join our team. I had lunch with them yesterday, and we're 9 months in, but they seem very happy. Yeah, the cultural clashes are one of the biggest reasons why when the 2 companies join forces, like usually it doesn't work out because the cultures are pretty different. Yeah.
Do you work directly or exclusively with the government, or do you work with like Google too?
So our customers are public transit agencies, generally speaking. So we like EC Transit, the buses that you would see, like they are our customer.
Yeah.
But then our end users are staff at the transit agency. So we have thousands of staff at transit agencies using Swiftly to monitor service, to communicate to riders, etc. And then also riders are consuming our data across all channels. So we're tracking all the buses for AC Transit, and our algorithms produce the ETA, the next bus arrives in 5 minutes. That goes to Google Maps, that goes to Apple Maps, every LED sign you see in like Transit Terminal, all of the data is coming from us in that. But you as a rider would never see that.
And then do you sell it as like a subscription to like your software?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's a SaaS model. So transit agencies will pay us X dollars per year for our product. And we have several different products. So the first fee will be based on how many products they bought and then how many vehicles they have with us. Yeah.
This is a question on the startups and generating of ideas, but how do you take into account like future relevancy, such as like online textbooks for making a textbook learner, when making Swiftly the increased use of like cars in Bay Areas and other places? How do you take that into account for when making or when coming up with the idea or changing the company?
Yeah. Yeah, so like thinking about a market long term is a really important dynamic. It's a very good question. So the textbooks, when I sold my first company, I had 2 term sheets on the table. One was to sell the company, one was to raise money. And the reason why I actually chose to sell, there were a few reasons, but 2 of the biggest ones were one, I felt like it would be a really good growth opportunity for me to go through an acquisition and to sell the company, and then to learn from a bigger company that had scaled to tens of millions of revenue, which I hadn't seen before. The second thing was I felt that the textbook market itself was very fragile because there's a world in which digital textbooks completely transcend physical textbooks, like printed textbooks. Or where classes just print like these are the 2 chapters you need and here's a printed piece of paper and you don't need to buy the whole book. And so those larger existential threats were why I was pretty heavily aligned with let's sell and like let me kind of de-risk that industry because I just don't know where that industry is going to go. So that's why I end up selling there. For public transit, that's something I think about a lot, right? Obviously Uber and Lyft completely changed the game. Then you saw similar types of trends with micro-mobility scooters, bike share, et cetera, Green and Bird. That kind of market came and went because it economically couldn't really make it work. But then you have autonomous vehicles on the horizon too. I think what's interesting about just the sheer volume of people, if you map out the width of roads in cities, and you think about millions of people that actually have to move to get to and from work or to social activities, to see their family, to see their friends, there is not enough road space for single occupancy vehicles. So even if you had autonomous vehicles and you had 1 person per car, you actually will still leave traffic. And so what that means is there's always a place for higher occupancy vehicles where you have more than 1 person. And public transit is one of the most efficient ways of moving people. So when you map out what's the end state, you probably still have buses and trains, but maybe they're autonomous buses and trains, not with a driver. Like at some point, there will be a world, and I think public transit will, or like the public sector will lag probably by 10, 20, or 30 years behind private sector, but there will still be a world where it makes sense to have a bus with 30 people on it because you can just move people way more efficiently. In that scenario, you think about New York, like if any of you have taken the subway in New York and it's packed with people around you during commute hours, imagine each person in their own car. Like, the road network in New York would not be able to support it. So you will need subways, you will need trains. But the role of drivers will change, but then I think about, okay, well how do you, what's Swiftly's role in that? Well, if agencies are using Swiftly today to make their public transit vehicles actually arrive on time and to communicate what's happening with the public, you still need that in the world of autonomous vehicles. And in fact, it actually becomes, some things, in some ways, become easier for us because right now we're the first company to launch an Android tablet that sits in front of the drivers. So like in our back office suite, you can draw a detour, there's another vision here, you draw a detour. It now will tell the driver, like turn left here or turn right here. That, believe it or not, doesn't really exist today. And then we'll update Google Maps in real time. We can send out those instructions to the driver or to an autonomous vehicle, but in any event, you still need a system that is tracking what's happening with the vehicles and contextually pulsing them so that they really stops at the right time. And so Swift replaces the vehicle. Yeah.
Going back to Rishi's question,
For Swiftly, how do you settle on your monetization strategy?
Have you set up what?
How do you settle on your monetization strategy?
Yeah, pricing and packaging is really big discussion. It's constantly evolving. I live in Moraga, so I drove around about 20 minutes away. In the car ride, I was listening to a podcast on pricing and packaging too, because AI is changing the whole thing again. And I'd say, a few different schools of thoughts generally for how to think about pricing. You could price based on your cost. To me, that's actually the worst possible way to do it. That's how a lot of pricing works in services business or consulting. It's based on your cost. You can price based on the value that you provide, right? Like if I'm going to help you save $1 million, since I be able to charge hypothetically up to $1 million because I help you save that. There needs to be a little ROI. Maybe I can charge up to $800,000 in price based on the value you provide. And then you can break that down to like price based on units, like per seats, how many users are logging in. You can price based on other factors, right? So what we found works best for our industry from a familiarity perspective, because remember, our customers are risk averse. They don't want to take risks, they don't want to change something. Most agencies think about vehicles as their unit. So a bus, they know like it costs like, let's say it's $1 million to buy a bus. It's actually about $1 million, like more for an electric bus, like $1 million to buy a bus. If you're buying any type of like hardware, software, you think about it on a per bus basis. And a bus is what drives your revenue as well, because that's how many riders take your system and tap on it. So we decided when we're going to charge SaaS, our unit is bus. So, or it's actually vehicle, because it could be train too or subway. But how many vehicles do you have? That's how agencies conceptualize their revenue and their costs. Based on that, we have kind of like tiers of here's what your annual fee will be for different products, and then the more products you buy, the bigger discount you get, because we want to incentivize agencies to buy more products. So it aligns our pricing with how they think about the world, and it supports scale, more vehicles, bigger discount, and more products, bigger discount. So we want to incentivize people to buy.
I just got one more.
Yeah.
Is it publicly or like publicly traded, or is like the majority shareholder?
We're private. So we're a private company. We've gone through different rounds of ownership. Early days was venture capital financed, then growth equity, and then more, let's say, like growth equity, private equity. So there's a lot of different investors that will take majority stakes in companies.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What would you say is the main difference between selling to bigger companies or places like the government versus selling it to individual people such as the textbooks? And how do you account for that, especially as a small startup company?
Yeah, and so enterprise sales, so there's different, so there's SaaS, right, like software as a service where you're selling software. And within that you can have consumer plays, so you're selling directly to consumers, so that might be with any product that you have purchased, any app you have purchased, that would be a consumer-oriented sale. And then you can have B2B or B2G. So B2B is B2B business to business, so you're selling to a business. And within that, you can sell to small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses. B2G is business to government. Generally, selling to government is perceived as like the highest friction sale, and that's why a lot of investors didn't want to work with us. They're like, government's so slow. Like it's gonna take you 5 years to close any deal with any agency. So the metrics a lot of investors look at is, what's your sales cycle time? How long does it take you to close a deal? What's your ASP, your average selling price? How big are those deals? Is there a correlation between bigger deal, longer time or not, right? And so then you get to like velocity. So when you're selling to consumers, you're selling a lot of units, right? They're small dollar price, but you're selling a lot of them, maybe 10,000 a month, 100,000 a month, depending on what your pricing is, what your product is, right? When you're selling to enterprises or government, you're maybe selling 10 deals a quarter, but each deal is $1 million or $5 million. Could be the same net amount, but very different. So they'll look at the unit economics. This is what investors will often look at, the unit economics of it. What's your sales cycle time? What's your win rate? What are your ASPs? How big are your deals? How long does it take? How often do you win? And if you can make the math work and all of those dimensions, they're like, that's a pretty cool, that's a pretty interesting business. what we found is for our end market, we're competing against 20 to 30-year-old legacy software systems that predate oftentimes the internet, right? So it's like, we're a pretty different product in our specific industry. Our sales cycles and our win rates, our sales cycles tend to be fairly low, our win rates tend to be fairly high, and our ASPs, our selling price tends to be pretty high because we're a pretty differentiated product. So you can make the math work in any one of those environments, but it still has to make sense economically where you can be a profitable company, otherwise you're just going to be pumping through cash, and then ultimately you'll grow really fast and then you'll go bankrupt because you burn through all your cash. So we're able to show that our economics made a lot of sense, and that even in the government world, we could replicate the sales cycle of selling to private sector, but we could do that in government, and the advantage of government is once you sign a contract with a government agency, they tend to stay with you for 5, 10, 15 years instead of leaving 2 years later with the private sector does. So we could replicate the velocity and the sales of the private sector sales, but with the stickiness and retention of the public sector. And that's why we started to do a lot of really good things.
I think part of having a business is also like good branding and stuff. So just out of curiosity, how'd you come up with the name Swiftly?
Good question. So the first name was actually Swift, S-W-Y-F-T. Yeah, we're a little confusing.
With Taylor Swift.
Swift, yeah, it was before. I mean, this is 10 years ago.
Right.
So Taylor Swift was still on the scene, but maybe not as big as she is now. But Swift, S-W-Y-F-T, and not as good of a name, confusing, obviously. The weird spelling of S-W-Y-F-T doesn't work perfectly, but we were trying to go for like move fast, moving in the city. And the big thing was that the domain, swift.com, was like $10. So it was like, it was like pretty easy to buy that. What we found out shortly thereafter was another company that competes with Uber that I won't name, but it starts with an L and ends with YFT. Got really good with us because we were Swift, and so they thought it was too close. So they forced us to change our name. They said, well, basically, like, so you make you go bankrupt if you don't change your name. They didn't say it quite like that, but it's effectively what they were doing. So we changed our name and bought Swiftly, which thank you to LYFT because Swiftly is much better. So that's we ended up where we are today. Couldn't get the swiftly.com domain because that was $150,000 at the time.
Do you have it now?
No, I don't have that domain. And you know what? No, we got Go Swiftly .ly, so our whole domain is Swiftly. So it's pretty easy. So, and we haven't found it.
Okay.
How do you stay ahead of your competitors?
Speed is one of the most valuable assets that a startup has. When you think about like how do you see these startups beat these huge companies that are already in their space, you have to outrun them. So the way you stay ahead of competitors is you're always 10 steps ahead. And if you're 10 steps ahead, your goal next year is to be 20 steps ahead. And then after that, 30 steps. So your goal is just outrun them and start off, change the paradigm, create a really big lead, and then grow that lead over time. Yeah.
Earlier you said you were you got really successful and you're sort of finding for venture capitalists. What is sort of main thing you would incorporate in the pitch for venture capitalists?
Yeah, you're saying that we were or were not successful? Because I'll tell you, in the early days, I would say we weren't successful in our pitches to investors. Mostly because a lot of investors don't want to invest in companies selling to government. I had enough of a track record just having been through my first company to raise some capital, but it wasn't we were never raising $20 million right out of the gate with no product like you see from a lot of companies. I think so what I have learned is that different investor categories care about different things. And so you have to know you have to really know who you're talking to and what they care about, and contextualize the pitch to them. So there's a pretty big difference between what angel investors, seed investors, Series A investors, Series B, venture capitalists, growth equity, private equity, they're pretty big categories, and within each category, each fund actually looks for different things. So I think the high level thing is know who you're talking about, know what matters to them, and position yourself accordingly. That's one of the most important things. That actually, just that helps with sales, it helps with anything. Like understanding what someone else cares about so you can be empathetic to their needs and understanding and reposition what you're doing to accommodate what they want is just a really important lesson. I would say with VC specifically, what the general VC mindset, I don't know if K-Ball has spoken with the group or not. I see, no? Okay, maybe some did. But a lot of VCs are looking for, especially in the early days, every company's super risky. Like a lot of these companies in the early days, they have no product, they have no customers, and maybe they're sub 1 million in revenue, but like jury's still out. Is what they're doing going to matter? So what a lot of these investors want is a company that is tackling a problem or a pain point that is large enough for them to get a 10x return or more on their investment. Not everyone, again, it has to be contextual to who you're talking to, but most of the earlier stage investors want to know, we're putting money in, we can get a 10x return for for a tech company, like 10x, sometimes 100x, 1000x return, right, for a lot of these AI companies. So that's really important at that stage. That's generally the venture world. The growth equity world is more, I want a high degree of certainty with a lot of confidence that I'm going to get a 2 to 3 or 4x return. So I will accept singles, doubles, and triples all day long, but I don't really want you swinging for the fences, or I don't need you to swing for the fences, and I don't want you to go bankrupt. I just want singles, doubles, and triples. So you'll see growth equity and private equity not do a ton of early stage investments because they're just too risky. A lot of those are going to strike out. And then some funds, kind of later stages of the private equity side, that's when you get to a lot more like financial engineering stuff, and that's not really what I'm interested in for Swiftly, so we haven't done any of those more financial engineering type deals. But what we found is our sweet spot is growth equity funds that love reliable businesses that are going to grow nicely. Like we're not ever going to, like I sell the government, I recognize that. I'm not going to go as fast as Salesforce, Slack, or half the AI companies you're reading on the news. That's just not possible in my end market. But can I double, triple, or quadruple or grow a company 5x over a reasonable amount of time? Pretty high likelihood of that. So those are the investors that tend to really like us. And if I pitch my story to any of the other investors, they'll be like, F off. Sorry. We're bad. Sorry.
Yeah. Just another question out of curiosity. As we're talking about transit, one of the companies that came to mind was the Boring Company, Elon Musk, and specifically like underground tunnels and stuff. Is that something that maybe you could do with Swiftly in the future?
Underground tunnels that lead to things called trains and subways, definitely within our wheelhouse. The Boring Company, sorry, I don't know why I'm getting something called. We'll see what happens with that. The way that they have generally positioned that is Tesla's in the tunnels moving people. We're probably not the right fit for that. I also think, it's novel to try to create more roads when there isn't enough road space that exists today, like we talked about prior. But I don't think that one's likely to be as much of a needle mover as actually just getting public transit to work really well.
Okay, so for the people in the room especially, since we're pretty young, what do you think would be good first things that we could try to do if we wanted to learn more about entrepreneurship or experience the field more, within our capabilities?
Yeah. Well, first off, you have your whole life in front of you, so I would just say find out what you're really passionate about. It could be entrepreneurship, it could be something else, but really ask some deep questions on what you care about and what you love, and experiment and fail. Just know you're at a great age to make mistakes. When I started my first company, I was like, I'm excited to start this because if we fail and we go bankrupt, I learned a ton of lessons along the way, and if we succeed, then I will have learned a lot and have been, maybe financially rewarded for that too. But either way, that's a win. So just don't be afraid to fail. Go out into the unknown. Just approach it with a growth mindset, because even now, I don't know everything there is to know about business. I don't know everything there is to know about transit. So every day I'm just trying to learn new things, and that's why I was listening to the podcast on the way here. So first off, just don't be afraid to make mistakes. You can go experiment with starting your own company. You can try to join a company as an intern. You can try to join investors to get broader expertise. All of those are viable paths. It's really around what you're interested in. And I think that you all should just choose that based on what is most interesting to you as an individual. And it might be the counterintuitive choice for some other people that were like, why would you do that? But if you feel strongly about it, I would just say do it. Take that leap of faith. Worst case, you make a mistake and then you learn from it. So the most important thing I think is just don't be afraid to make mistakes and just try whatever you're interested in.
Kind of a similar question on that note. If you had to do it all over again, would you like change anything about your process or like how you went about it?
You know, with the knowledge that I have today, of course I would change,
Yeah.
you know, like probably everything that I did in the early days of both of my companies. But I wouldn't, but candidly, I actually don't think I would change a whole lot because the mistakes that I made, I had to go through them to learn from them. And some of you look back and, you know, they're like emotional mistakes where you feel really bad about doing something that impacted someone else. Some of them were mistakes that impacted me more than others. But those are all growth moments. So I honestly don't think I would change anything, even though I've made probably thousands of mistakes over the last 15, 20 years since I started working and started my companies, but they're pretty important. Yeah.
What are like your most, what do you think are like some key points that you would like, that you would have liked to know when you were starting out new companies? Like what do you think would have been valuable information for you to know? Not necessarily ones that, it could be the ones that you learned from mistakes, but just like general information that would have helped you kind of either go through the path, whether it's the same, whether it was the same mistakes, or things that were just happened.
Yeah, I think there are a million things that happened in the early days of a company, and it is actually really hard to predict everything. There are like general things that you have to create a company, right? But then you have a choice. Do you want to be an LLC? Do you want to be a Delaware C Corp? Do you want to be a C Corp? Like, there are all these decisions that turn out to be really complicated. I think the most important thing is just find a mentor or two that you love, that you respect, that you trust, who can help you. I don't know if there are like specific decisions that necessarily matter a ton more. Like there's hundreds of thousands of micro decisions. They all add up to something big. So something that you can run those ideas by is pretty cool.
Sort of like, because I know at this school we have a lot of things to do, a lot of extracurriculars, a lot of schoolwork. So I was like wondering how, like even in college, like how much time and energy do you put into your business, and how do you manage that with your like other responsibilities?
So I was working a lot in college. I did my engineering degree at Harvard Mudd College, a small school in Southern California, and then I did finance, accounting, and econ at Claremont McKenna College. Did a Robert Day Scholar program my senior year, and then I did a class across the street again at the Kent Graduate Institute, and then on top of that, I started my own company in my dorm room. So I did a lot of like different things. I actually don't regret any of that. I loved it. I was maybe working a little too hard, but I really did like it. And one of the big things I did was I convinced my school to give me academic credit for starting a company in my dorm room. So I was like the only one basically in my class, but that was pretty cool, and it gave me the confidence, just like the confidence that they were willing to. You know, worst case, I would get course credit, even if the class failed. Right? And it turns out now, I just found out actually a little while ago that apparently now that is a lot, like they have a formal program around that for students, which is pretty cool. I don't think it had anything to do with me. It was just like probably turned into like a big lead of students, but try to align your interests with wherever it is that you are. And if academic credit matters or things like that, like try to, like, just don't be afraid to ask the school that you're at or wherever you are, like, hey, can I get credit for this? So I can spend more time and really give, you know, an honest attempt at trying to start a company. And when I was there, like, if I didn't ask, I knew for sure that they were going to say, or that the answer was no, because it didn't exist. But I asked, I created a really compelling argument as to why the school should care about this, and then they approved it. So again, like, Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to ask questions that might feel hard to do at the time, but it's okay. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Find a mentor. Find a school that can help you, or have someone coach you or mentor you. Like, just ask questions. And I find that generally people care about you as individuals. They care about you as students, and they'll invest their time and energy to support you in things that matter to you. So just don't be afraid to ask.
All right. Are there any final questions? All right. We'll just give a round of applause. There is pizza, so everybody you can grab one slice. One. We don't place that. We use a napkin for it. So, yeah.
One slice.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for coming.